Welcome to MBS Academy's Real Lives episodes. And today we're talking to Christine Kjeldberg. Hi, Christine, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Jackie?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. And as we spoke before, the purpose of these videos, these episodes, are to help other people with their own life experiences. So it's about sharing stories, sharing ideas, sharing ways of overcoming difficulties and obstacles in life. So let's begin by, maybe you could just tell everybody about yourself.
Okay, well, I am originally born and brought up in the UK with an English father and a Dutch mother. Lived there for 28 years before being kidnapped by a Viking and shipped over, so to speak, to Denmark. And in Denmark, I had my two girls there, and I was there for 7 years. And I learnt Danish very quickly, and I felt I had to because I looked like a Dane in their eyes. So everyone would approach me speaking Danish. So it made more sense just to learn the language and be able to reply straight away rather than say, And then due to my husband's work, we actually ended up moving down to the south of France. And we've been here for almost 14 years. So both girls have been through French schooling and are now actually completing studies in the UK. So I have a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old. One is doing in her first year at uni and the other one is doing A-levels in the UK. I work as a personal trainer and have done so for 25 years. That's a long time.
Yes.
And I am also a nutritional therapist with both a bachelor in nutritional therapy and a master's in personalized nutrition. And I've always, sorry.
I was going to say, what sort of obstacles have you overcome that help you with your personal training and your nutrition work?
Obstacles. I mean, what led me there was more, I've always been active. So I was always on the school teams, captain for netball, hockey, did all those sports, loved doing sports. For me, it was an escape route, so to speak. And I also danced, and I danced from the age of 3. Now, my mum sent me to dancing because I was one of those chubby little kids that was falling over every 2 seconds. So she thought it would strengthen my ankles. But then I ended up starting a degree, a dance and society degree at university. And I was the only one that had got in that wasn't at accredited dance school, as in studying full-time dance. I actually went for fun and got one of these 20 places. But I dropped out of that because it threw me back into an area that I'd just come out of, which is an eating disorder.
Okay.
Which had developed in my early teens. And I found that I was being pushed down a path I didn't want to be, that I was fighting, had been fighting to get out of. So I actually chose to drop out of university. And my dad was very, very disappointed. So having been close to my dad, I then ended up being pulled away from him for a period of time. And it was because I was the first person in our family ever to got into university and gone to university. So of course he was disappointed in that respect, but I felt the burden on my shoulders quite heavily.
Right.
Anyway, I went into work, various jobs, working from a secretary up to a PA for a CEO. I'm quite a good organizer, so that was very good. But during that time, I really, really missed the activity that had always been part of me, and I liked the emotional outlet that activity does give.
Okay.
So whether that be going back to the netball and hockey, or whether it be dance, you can get emotions out through movement. And sitting down in a chair wasn't doing me much good for a period of time. It wasn't for me. So I guess then I was around 23, 24, I then went in and started doing my personal training studies. It was actually with sports therapy, so doing the massage and all that as well, and setting up business for the first time by myself in the UK, as well as working in a fitness centre part-time. So I was teaching classes for them, but doing my personal training as well for myself. And then I was doing that while I was met my husband, and then obviously the move to Denmark meant I had to recreate what I'd established in the UK. But I did so actually with great success, because I did have some Pilates background as a dancer.
Yeah.
I mean, the Pilates technique is nothing new. It's actually quite old. Joseph Pilates was around during the World War, so it's not something new, even though it's been very popular in the last 20 years.
Yes.
So I was one of the first people to actually start teaching that in Denmark. And because of that, I worked with a physiotherapist over there, and we did various DVDs and various books, and I was always used in the fitness magazines doing Pilates exercises. So I did establish quite a good reputation with my Pilates in Denmark. And of course I carried on, I did personal training as well, created my own studio and had private clients that way. The whole time, the nutrition aspect that I did have also a background in was missing, because even though I'd had the eating disorders, I studied food and nutrition, even though it was at O level. And then when I started university, the girls around me were also studying nutrition there. I also come from a family of chefs.
Oh, okay.
On my mum's side. So that's why the eating disorders doesn't really sit right, and why I probably pulled myself out, because I actually love food.
Yes.
So I think it was a temporary blip.
Okay. When you say you had an eating disorder, was it on the anorexia side or on the bulimia side?
Both. So it started at 14 as anorexia. I lost weight very, very quickly, because I literally was starving myself. I think I was living off an apple and a cracker a day. So at 14, I was fairly tall fairly quickly and big boned, as my mother was. So I went from something like 50 kilos to 35 kilos in 3 months, which for a 14-year-old is ridiculous. And but I kept pushing myself with all the sports and all the dancing. I was on the verge of being hospitalized, but knew I didn't want to be hospitalized, but also because I felt I had a responsibility at home for looking after my brother and sister, who were younger than me.
Okay.
So I pulled myself out of that by eating, but then became bulimic.
Yes. Okay.
Now with that, you don't necessarily get rid of everything. So I did put on a bit of weight, enough to keep me out of hospital. And I suppose I ended up looking fairly normal again. But that was actually much harder to break out of that cycle than the anorexic bit. But that, again, because I told you I love eating.
Yeah.
I love food. So that was much harder. But I did find out over time and through lots of self-reflection and working with, it wasn't a place I wanted to be. I hated it. But again, it was a way of releasing emotion. I think the binging and purging was a way of releasing emotion for me.
Yeah.
Because my father wasn't very verbal then. He's got better with age, but he wasn't very good at verbalizing himself then. So, and being the eldest of 3, it was a different society we were brought up in then. People didn't speak about things the way they do now. I think the world would have been an easier place to be in had they been speaking more.
Yes, maybe.
It was very much that stiff upper lip in England, and not telling other people about what was going on.
Nobody talked about anything, wasn't it? It was all,
no one talked about anything. Yeah.
Nobody talked about anything. It was just
So that was, for me, the way I got out of it. It was actually when I met my husband, even though I'd been working beforehand in trying to get out of it. I was actually working with a nutritionist there, and there weren't many nutritionists around then. And what I found great was that she was explaining the way certain food molecules contributed to certain physiological aspects of the body, certain mechanisms in the body.
Okay.
And that's when everything clicked into place for me, and I thought, I need to go back to this at some point.
Yes.
So the love I had from my now husband, who I've been with for many, many years, helped pull me out of that as well. For the first time, I think, in my life, that I felt that I was worth something.
Right.
And also in Denmark, living there, I tried to conceive and didn't conceive straight away. Using actually nutrition and reflexology, I was able to get pregnant, and this was both times around. Now I did have what's called polycystic ovaries,
Yeah.
which is cysts there. So of course it was going to be harder for me to get pregnant anyway. But still, after 2 or 3 years of trying, you think, am I not going to get pregnant now? So I do think that actually the nutrition and the reflexology played a huge part in giving me 2 healthy girls.
Yes. Yes. I think nutrition is so important. I always think about plants, and plants, we're all made of the same stuff. We're just different shaped cells.
Yeah.
And, if you've got a sick plant, we nurture it, we feed it, we give it a good environment, we give it water. But we don't tend to do the same thing when we're sick, which is a bit of a shame, I think. So I do think nutrition is hugely misunderstood, I think, by unless you actually study it and understand it. I think everyday life, most people don't really understand it. We tend to sort of just follow whatever eating patterns we have. You were brought up by chefs, so you probably had a greater understanding maybe of food than most people. We tend to follow our family patterns or our cultural patterns as far as food goes, without any real understanding.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting that you use nutrition in that way to overcome the problems of getting pregnant.
Yeah.
You mentioned that your mother put you into dance when you were 3 because you were a chubby child. Do you think, because that's a very young age to have that thought that you're chubby, or maybe you're different in that way, do you think that contributed to your later eating disorders and your later anorexia?
Yeah, no, I don't think it did, because I don't remember being that chubby child. If I look at pictures now, I probably wouldn't be perceived as chubby at all. I do know that I slept and ate extremely well as an infant, and because of that I was a bit of a Michelin baby, but so was my husband. So, but then you sort of grow up and everything sort of goes its natural course and you lose all that baby fat. So but I probably was quite clumsy.
So do you think so you didn't have a misrepresentation of your own body image? You think that your eating disorder was very much an emotionally based one?
There was a trigger when I was about 14. Now that trigger came from a boy at school who one day said something along the line of thunder thighs.
Right.
Now I'd never thought of myself as having thunder thighs before, but at 13, 14, a girl is very vulnerable with all those hormones flying around. And I mean, that guy who said it to me, he was an overweight boy, and he's a very overweight man now.
Right.
which is strange. But so why I should take that to heart, I think I was really, really frustrated and vulnerable, because I was brought up with an alcoholic mother.
Okay.
So I brought up, my sister's only 13 months younger, so there's not a big gap between us. But still, when it came to trying to hide the booze, trying to smooth things over, we didn't have friends at home because it was too embarrassing. or, you know, my dad worked, we lived out in Berkshire. My dad travelled into London in the city for his job every single day. So he was up early, took him 2 hours to get to work, and he'd be back very late. So he wasn't around much, except at weekends when he was busy driving us to all our clubs and sports and everything else, which we did to also escape home.
Okay.
So we were very, very active kids. But I wouldn't say we had a calm, relaxing, nurturing upbringing. So that 14-year-old girl in me, I think that was just the trigger, what the boy had said, to a build-up of many years of emotional restraints, trying to keep everything in. And then I just needed some outlet, and that turned to be, or some control in my life, because nothing else seemed to be in control, and that was actually stopping eating. And
anorexia is associated with control quite often. So what sort of emotions do you think you were suppressing? Was it anger? Was it frustration? Was it?
I think it was both. I think it was anger towards, if not towards my mum directly, into why she couldn't be helped. Right. Again, it was a case of, I know for years that we tried to get her to admit she was an alcoholic, and she had so many accidents, bad accidents, that almost cost her life and maybe our lives in certain situations, where you would think it would be enough for then that person to say, okay, I've got a problem and I need help. Yes. But she never asked for help, and then you could never get the person to get help unless they admitted they had a problem.
Yes.
Not even the doctors would say, okay, I can get your mum help, unless she comes to me and says, I am an alcoholic and I want help.
Yeah.
And also the groups for the families, they certainly weren't in our area around that time. So we're talking in the 70s and early 80s. And they certainly weren't, not like they are now.
And again, it wouldn't have been talked about. It would have been something to be maybe feel ashamed of. And you said you talked about not having friends over because it was embarrassing.
Yeah. And I mean, my poor mum, I lost her when she was 60 because I think for the years and years of alcohol, and then having to take medicine for certain things in her body that had given up. And then she got hit with a really bad influenza and her body said stop. She ended up having a heart attack. But I think that looking back, she had myself and my sister very quickly. So she was on her own at home with 2 very young kids. And then my brother came some years later. But the drinking apparently started when my sister was around 18 months, when I was around 18 months, and my sister was about 5 months old. And I actually think it was a depression following the second birth, so in quick succession, and being left by herself a lot. But again, then in those days, no one spoke about postnatal depression. It wasn't a recognised problem.
No.
And had she been alive now, I think it would have been a completely different story, possibly.
Yeah. So as a child, you must have felt, I think if it had been myself, I would have wondered why she wasn't prepared to, especially if you were having accidents that were causing, or she was creating, or having accidents where your lives were threatened, sort of, why couldn't she do it for me? Why are we not good enough as kids for her to want to give up the drink and look after us better? Sort of feelings possibly would have been going through my head. Was she ever treated for, or did she ever admit that she had an alcohol issue?
Not at all.
No.
And even though I had a big row with her probably 3 months before she died, and I was living in Denmark and she was in the UK, and I was saying, you've got to face up to your problem, and a lot of the problems I've had in the past are due to how you've been, and she wouldn't speak to me afterwards because she didn't think it was herself that had been behind any of these issues. She still wasn't willing to accept it. So we were never close. My sister was very close to her,
Okay.
My sister also stayed at home when I left England to go to Denmark. My sister also had been with a boyfriend and then gone back home, so she was there a lot. But I also think in a way it's because she was quite a naughty teenager, and it gave her a lot of freedom because my mum wouldn't be able to stop her doing what she wanted to do. She wasn't capable of it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So your sister actually, you took on the role of your mum really, and took on some responsibilities, and you also felt the pressures of the emotional pressures as well as the pressures of being a teenager and the responsibilities of that. Whereas your sister took advantage or made the most of it, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
You know, she didn't have the same experiences as you, even though you were quite close in age.
So I think, given the fact that I've seen what poor nutrition, lack of nutrition can do, has spurred me on to wanting to help people with good nutrition.
Yes.
And mine is I've always been a believer of prevention, and that what we do over time can actually impact our lives in the future, and the lives of our children in the future. So what we do today may impact us in 20 years. So that's my philosophy, is looking at how we can best support our health, but also through a balanced way. I mean, I'm born a Libran, which is the sign of the scales. So it's everything in balance. And if I want a croissant now and again, I'll have my croissant. So I think also, having gone through everything I've been through with all these addictions and eating and not eating, I've actually ended up being in a very, very sensible place, because there are also some nutritional therapists or nutritionists that might go and say, you definitely can't eat this, you definitely can't eat that. Now, there are, of course, certain situations where people have to avoid certain things. If they have for example, an autoimmune disease, and it might trigger a negative reaction through release of more negative antibodies in a person. If they eat a certain food, of course, they need to stay away from that particular food. But then we look at how we can balance and make life fun and interesting in all the other areas, so that that person doesn't feel that they're missing out in any way. And food is still an enjoyment. Food should be an enjoyment. Yes,
absolutely. Do you think, because you saw a nutritionist when you were going through your eating disorders, do you feel that was one of the main contributors to you coming out the other side of it? Or
Definitely. I mean, when I saw this nutritionist, I must have been about 18, 19 years old. And so that was the stage when I was bulimic. And she was vibrant, young, she must have been mid-20s. She didn't place any demands on me. We just had good chats, and she gave me tools of how to try and overcome a situation without me feeling guilty if I was to binge and purge. But we worked through it all. And I ended up coming out thinking, I want to do what she's doing.
Yeah, all right, excellent. So yes, your experiences really did lead you.
And the tools that she gave me to work through bulimia did help. And there were no time constraints. It wasn't a case of, okay, you need to have a week without purging. You know, it was a case of, okay, if you get through the next meal, great. And then let's note this down and note how you were feeling, what time of day it was, and what foods did you eat? Are there certain foods that may trigger this need to purge? So we looked at many different things in that time, but all of that was great learning experience now when I look back on it.
Yeah. But she also talked about your feelings. So it wasn't just about a diet regime, it was about your relationship with food as well, as well as your relationships with the rest of the world and how you're feeling in yourself.
She made me understand that, what I was doing was a way of releasing certain feelings.
Yes.
And when I was eating certain foods as well, that was also a way of suppressing certain emotions.
Right.
So it was also to try and avoid certain foods if I was feeling, say, angry or feeling sad. So it was a massive learning experience, really was. And also to try and rid myself of that feeling of guilt.
Yes.
Go around with, even as a child, you go around with a feeling of guilt. Is why is my mum like she is? Is it because of me? And, you know, all those kind of things. So massive learning experience.
Yes, definitely. But it's really good that, you know, you found what worked for you, because I think it's important for, you know, if people want to make changes in their lives. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything as you know, dramatic and big as your experiences, but anybody that wants to make changes to the way they think, the way they feel, or the way they behave, they really have to find out what works for them.
Yeah.
And I think the only way you know if it's going to work is if you know about it in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, if somebody would like to know more about nutrition, and, you know, like to know more about your story, and maybe it would help them, how would they contact you?
I do have a website, which is my initials, CK and then -health.com. So, and there's the contact little banner on there, so you can just send me a message that way. Or the best way is to telephone me and even have a complimentary chat, which I'm willing to give to anyone who calls me. And that's a French mobile number. So that's 0633 273767. So it's +33 if you're outside of France. But yeah, I'm always happy to just have a complimentary chat with people. And also that way I find out whether or not that person would feel comfortable working with me. And I would feel comfortable working with them.
Yeah. Because that's another really important part of any
exactly. And if I feel that it's also outside of my capabilities, because it could be something that is where I don't feel trained or qualified in handling, then I would also pass that person on to, or refer them on to someone else. And I have had people in the past come to me and say it was to do with a nutrition thing that they wanted to change. But when I've asked certain questions, I found out that actually there's a much deeper emotional issue associated too. So then I would pass on to a therapist first and say, I think this is where you need to start.
Yes.
And then when you have more control over that area in your life, then by all means come back and we can look at the nutrition side. But I think you need to tackle this area first.
Yes. Yeah, because as you start making changes, other things will change. It's a bit like a domino effect, isn't it? So it is really important to be aware of, you know, it's not a one-stop fixes-all situation. That, you know, it is a journey, and it is a growth, and it is an understanding. And I think it's really good to have an understanding of all the different tools. I mean, you mentioned, you were talking through your story about having the tools to be able to deal with things and understand things. And obviously this nutritionist gave you lots of those. And also you were using your dance and exercise and you know, sport as a tool to release all the emotional energy you had as well.
And now I still use running. I like to run, so probably 4 times a week. I will be out pounding the pavements or in the forest or something when we can. And I don't run with music. I want nature, and I want my own thoughts to have their own space to be worked through. And I often come up with solutions to things when I'm just out there running in nature. You know, and people have asked me, how can you, you know, run that far and not have music? I actually find music very, very distracting, and a noise that I don't need. There's enough emotional chatter going on there sometimes.
I think that's a really good point, because I think if you've got things going through your mind, you do actually have to give it time to be processed. I think too often we sort of go, oh no, I don't want to think about that. It makes me feel sad, it makes me feel angry or guilty or frustrated, but actually you just need to work through it. And I think you need to find a way that works for you.
And also I think people need to remember that they need to give themselves time.
Yes.
we've been living in a very fast-paced society. Now, we actually happen to be speaking while this COVID virus is on, so
Yes.
we've been forced to slow down, and it's actually been very, very good for lots of people, I think. Not so good for some others, but I think everyone was, you know, probably going a little bit too fast, not allowing themselves time to slow down and reflect. And, you know, with every little problem that comes up in life, we shouldn't expect simple solutions or a solution just to work immediately. And it's the same with nutrition. A lot of people expect these miracle quick fixes, but you know, Rome wasn't built in a day, and certainly those cells in the body didn't disappear overnight.
Yeah.
And they can't be replaced overnight. I mean, they do replace themselves, but it's a longer process depending on which organ we're working with.
Yes.
So you know, that it takes time. And I've got clients with autoimmune diseases and even cancer, and they understand it takes time. They see the progress, and we record the progress step by step. And the reason we do record it is so that they can go back and look and say, oh, that's where I was a year ago. Because sometimes 2 years later, it's like, well, why aren't I making great improvements anymore? Yes, you still are improving, but look where you were.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, you know, you accept the new norm, don't you? And you quickly forget what was there before.
Yeah. I mean, even you've mentioned the current situation with the virus, and what, week 5, 6, 4, I can't remember now.
We're definitely
5, I think. Yeah. And you know, it's only 5 weeks, yet this has become the norm. And I think it just shows you how quickly, you know, changes do become the norm within. And I do believe there's research out there that says the brain takes 3 weeks to accept change.
Yeah.
So
certainly with habits and changing of routines.
Yeah. And appearances and things, it takes that length of time. So this has become our new norm. And I also agree that, with this particular time, I think we're actually fortunate in some ways, because it's not very often that anybody in their lifetime gets a chance to hit pause.
No.
And I think it is a time to take that time to reflect, to work through maybe things you haven't had a chance to sit and think about before.
Yeah.
And I'm sure lots and lots of people come out the other side of this changed one way or another. I'm not saying it's all going to be positive. But I think it is, you've got to take the positives from this, and for me the positive is that, you know, being able to hit pause. And
for me as well, it's you know, I was doing classes every single morning and seeing nutritional clients most afternoons, or at least doing something nutrition wise most afternoons, whereas now I'm probably doing half of that. But then I do have to juggle around my family. So I'm teaching classes online through Zoom, and I'm doing nutritional consultations online through Zoom. And as much as I miss the personal contact, I've still enjoyed the challenge of creating my little universe online, and still having contact with the clients I was certainly seeing for training, some several times a week.
Yes.
But also enjoying, there are a couple of mornings a week that I don't have to jump out and be ready for action in my gear, and if I want to keep my pajama bottoms on, I can. You know, I could be talking to you in my pajama bottoms and the visor.
I am.
So it's
unique time.
Yeah.
It's been great talking to you, and thank you so much for doing this. If there was one piece of advice, information, or experience that you could pass on to somebody who maybe is going through, or has, you know, still struggling with emotional feelings, or, you know, the physical problems of having an eating disorder, what information or advice would you give them?
I would advise them to definitely reach out to someone they trust and knows that won't judge them. And the non-judgmental part is extremely important, because if you do have an eating disorder, the first thing you do feel all the time is judged by what you're doing. So reaching out to someone, and whether or not it's someone you actually know or someone in a more professional capacity, that's entirely up to you. And also to know that there is a way out of that arena.
Yes.
There are definitely tools that are useful for everyone. And I was told once upon a time, oh, once anorexic, always an anorexic. That is totally not true.
No, that in itself is great to hear. Yeah, it's yes, I think that's saying, and I think that must be a fear that anybody who is going through an eating disorder, an anorexic disorder of any description, must feel, this is never going to end.
Yeah, and your body can repair itself.
Yes, through the right nutrition. Yes. That's great, thank you. We will be putting up at the end, we'll put a little notice up with contact details for yourself.
Great.
And websites and other information that may be of use to people. And thank you again. And
it's been lovely chatting with you.
Yes, it's been great. And I'd just like to say thank you to everybody that's been listening and watching these episodes, and please share and like, because this is the way that we can carry on doing these episodes and helping, because we really want to help people and help the community. Thank you very much for listening and watching.